Let's do the questions, Joel. Yeah, the reflective questions first.
Fantastic. So we have a question: how can technology save teachers time when giving feedback? So I think this is obviously quite a general question, but what I tried to show. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the nice comments. I really appreciate it, and I like to have meaty presentations. I like to give sort of value for money or lots of information, and also I think. As you pointed out, I think giving attribution to people is incredibly important because it's all about the community. It's not about an individual. It's about everyone working together and sharing ideas and being inspired by each other. So I've done that for years and years and years, giving attribution. I think it's very important with links and what have you. But in relation to how technology can save teachers time when giving feedback, I think for example, some of the ideas I've just shown, for example, the extended clipboard that you get with Windows, the way in which you can have a bank of comments there. So all you have to do is tap on the particular comment and it goes straight into it could be a PowerPoint or what have you, or it could be a Word document giving that feedback. You could, if you're looking for sort of like a whole class feedback, you could look at everyone's work and then either do a written feedback or spoken feedback, which you then apply to everyone's piece of work. That's something that some teachers do to save time. Whole class feedback. You can also do sort of like a live marking idea. So in addition to what I was saying earlier about having a Google Doc with different columns in a table and assigning the name and the text and then adding feedback in real time, and then allowing the students to act on that feedback, which I know I mentioned in the presentation, but that's incredibly important. The more real time is the feedback, the better for the students. So they're not waiting a week, for example, for you to give their books back. That they can then respond to that feedback, and then that should then help them to remember and to make those connections or those neural pathways in their brains. But if you had, for example, some technology like a visualizer, then you could take a student's exercise book, you could put it on the visualizer, a bit like the old OHPs. I remember when I first started teaching, I had an OHP, overhead projector. It's the same idea essentially, and then you can then live mark that piece of work, pointing out common mistakes that people make, and everyone can then take on board the feedback you're giving and then adapt their work accordingly. So live marking with the visualizer, which is not something I put within the presentation, but that's another way in which you can use technology to save time if you're giving whole class feedback. But in general, I think, say, if you're looking at spoken feedback, it can be quicker. I certainly think that you can give more feedback in the same amount of time that you give the written feedback. And that's one of the important points, I think. And also, as I was saying in the presentation, it's the way you can convey different types of meaning through the voice. The voice is incredibly powerful in relation to how you can use your intonation and your the pacing of your voice, the cadence of your voice. It can express things which are much more difficult or can be misconstrued when you're writing. So I think that it might take the same amount of time, or it might be quicker, depending if you're happy with just going with the first take. If you're a perfectionist and you want to take multiple takes when giving audio feedback, then that maybe isn't necessarily a good thing. It might take too much time to do that. But if you're happy with sort of doing everything in one take, you can really say a lot in the same amount of time it would take you to do writing, and then finally, you could easily do, say, a screencast as well. So you can record the screen using a tool like Screencastify as a way of being able to give video feedback over, say, a piece of work in a Google Doc or a class notebook, and then you can then record that screencast and put that the link from that screencast into a comment box in Docs or in class notebook. Also, in relation to the live writing idea, you could do exactly the same thing in a Word document. So I was talking about the ability to make a collaborative PowerPoint, which I know lots of people on social media I'm connected with in my community didn't know that was possible at the beginning of the pandemic when we were in lockdown, and lots of teachers were using that for a remote teaching context, whereby the teacher could see all the slides in one go, either by clicking on Slide Sorter in the PowerPoint equivalent, or if you're using Google Slides, you could use the Slide Sorter, so the grid view, the grid view, and then you can then see all the slides in one go, and then the children can then work on their own slide in that context. So I think there's lots and lots of ways in which you can speed up the feedback, but it's finding your own way. I think it's finding the way in which you you find is most effective, and obviously what the children think as well.
I just want to add to what you said. I think that with technology and feedback, it's not, of course, it's saving time, but I think that what is really most important, and that's the greatest benefit of technology and feedback, the greatest benefit is that feedback becomes more dialogic. So, of course, it's saving time, but I do feel like when I was watching this video and trying to kind of imagining, different scenarios were just going through my head, and I felt like, feedback only makes sense. Oral feedback is only effective if it's dialogic. Otherwise, what's the point, right? And the fact that it happens in class and you can personalize it, right? It's great. So it's not as much about saving time as about making it more formative and more of a dialogue. I feel myself, and I loved this idea. The one that you showed, I think it was Google Docs, and the teacher, so students write in real time, and the teacher provides feedback in real time on the site. And what came to my mind, Hedy is going to laugh because I'm going to bring up my little niece again. So my little niece is not so little, she's 16, but she absolutely hates writing. She hates school in general, but writing in particular. And it's not just my niece. Most students, if you give them feedback on writing after they have finished writing, tell me how many students will actually even bother to look at this feedback. Nobody cares because, kids, teenagers, even adults are just happy that it's finished, it's over, okay? Feedback, okay, but now it's too late. So the idea that this feedback actually happens in real time is absolutely brilliant because kids cannot kind of run away from it. They have to respond to the teacher in real time. So it's great. That's all I wanted to add.
No, that's okay, and I very much echo what you said about the sort of dialogic approach to feedback. I think that one of the great ways about doing spoken feedback is it makes it. It might take the same amount of time for some people compared to written feedback, but it's richer feedback. I think that's the point I was trying to make. It's richer because you can say so much more, and the way in which your voice conveys different meanings. So in my mind, compared to just writing. Codes or writing the word spelling or SP as a code, etc. If you're doing spoken feedback, it can be much richer compared to written feedback.
But you know what? I'm going to be cheeky now because you said we can say more, right? When we do oral feedback, when we record ourselves. But then don't you worry that sometimes there may be a risk of kind of teachers going off on a tangent? So, when you give spoken oral feedback, you see, at least I tend to speak a lot. So sometimes there's no need for that much talk, right? So when we actually have to write it down, then we narrow down what we want to say. But when we speak, this feedback may actually get lost in translation. Students may not nail it down because we talk a lot. So there is a risk of that.
There is the risk for that, absolutely. But I would imagine, what I would just say to that is that obviously every teacher is different. You would need a bit of practice to hone your skills in relation to being concise, which is a skill in itself. What I would suggest is when I'm doing, for example, a podcast interview, what I tend to do is instead of writing a script, I'll write bullet points. So you could do exactly the same thing. You could write let's say 10 bullet points or 5 bullet points of the sorts of things you expect to be talking about as a visual reminder. There's also the pause button with some of these tools as well, so you could always pause, collect your thoughts, and then carry on recording. But I think if you had a set of, I don't know, say 30 bits of work you had to mark, you probably get into a rhythm and be able to do that quite quickly. Obviously, if you're quite verbose or you like to be, loquacious and talkative, etc., then there is that risk. But as with anything, you probably wouldn't write an essay necessarily, would you, on a piece of work?
Yeah.
If you like writing, you probably still want to keep it concise because you're thinking, oh, I want to watch such and such a television program at 8 o'clock, and I've got to get through all this, this feedback. So I think the actual practical nature of giving feedback, people are always looking for shortcuts, and I think that spoken feedback definitely can be a shortcut. But I think having like an ed memoir, having some bullet points, can make it more concise, which can definitely help. But as with anything, I think it's just practice.
Yeah.
So it might take you a bit longer the first few times you do it, but then you should hone your skills and it'll become second nature, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's just a matter of it's practice, as you said. So, but before you move on to the next question, because you also said, what was it that you said that I made a comment? Okay, so it's if feedback is dialogic, say, so it's oral feedback. Now, would you say that how much sense does it make to give oral feedback, dialogic feedback after the lesson? The point I'm trying to make is that if it's dialogic and if it's after the lesson, again, are you not worried that then this dialogue may be a never-ending dialogue? So you see, the thing with students is that if you provide feedback, okay, after the lesson, delayed feedback, there's no dialogue, right? You say to your students, this, you need to work on this, okay, that's your strength. And that's the end of it. Now, if this develops into a dialogue, it's all fine if you only teach one student. But what if you have 20 students and then you have this dialogue, a never-ending dialogue with individual students?
So I would imagine that most teachers wouldn't want to have a never-ending dialogue with individual students, for sure. I think when we talk about dialogic feedback, to me, what we're saying is the difference between when you're speaking or you're giving feedback. What you're saying is you're trying to save time. You're trying to replicate what you would do by writing, but by giving speaking. It obviously depends on the speaking feedback you're giving. But essentially, what you're trying to do is you're trying to save time and give short and concise feedback, which you're not necessarily expecting any sort of reply to. So even though we're talking about when we talk about dialogic in that sense, to me, what that means is that you're just using your voice to record your feedback, but it's not necessarily expecting an answer. That said, in other webinars that I've done for gallery teachers, we've looked at Flipgrid and we've looked at Quicker, both of which allow you to have that dialogue, or certainly for the teacher to ask a question, and then all the students can then reply to that particular question, whereby it is a dialogue in the sense that it's a Q&A anyway. But I'm not suggesting that you have a never-ending back and forth. I mean, there are some schools that will use different coloured pens for the students to reply to the feedback that the teacher has given, and to me I can see how that could be useful, but it's the risk of that is it could be a great way of spending a lot of time that teachers don't have. But I think the point about the difference between, say, spoken feedback and written feedback in this is in the sense that with written feedback, it might be as you were saying about your niece, is that maybe your niece would only want to look at the mark and not actually look at the written feedback. Whereas if it's audio feedback, then I think there's that sense of mystery of what's it going to be like when I listen to my teacher's voice or the feedback that I give. And maybe the student would want to listen to that more than once. And maybe through the audio feedback, it will be more embedded in their brains. Whereas if it's written feedback, maybe they won't look at the feedback, particularly if it's a week old. They'll just look at the mark. And so again, I think that's why audio feedback can be
I absolutely agree with you, Joe. I mean, sorry to interrupt.
No, I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's a really interesting question. Yeah,
I agree with you. It's just that, you know, when this was one of the questions that came to my mind, but I absolutely agree with you, and I agree that in particular for language learners, audio feedback, oral feedback, will be more beneficial than written feedback. I mean, let's be honest, right? Because as you said, it's also practicing kind of real understanding, right? It's pronunciation, it's everything. And who wants to read these days? Not young people, they don't. So yeah, so I agree with you. I asked you this question because I'm the devil's advocate. So I just need.
No, I love it. I think having given various presentations recently, either virtually or face to face, and asking teachers about how are they using spoken feedback more at the moment, particularly as a result of the pandemic, particularly in when we had the lockdowns, and quite a few teachers that I've been presenting to have said that they are using verbal feedback. So I love that idea of a multi-modal approach. We don't have to just focus on the written feedback. We can look at audio feedback or video feedback in the sense of a screencast. It's just nice to explore different things, and that's why I think a presentation like this that people can watch back as many times as they need to can hopefully be inspired and just try things out. Try out Mote or try out vocaroo or whatever it might be, and see what the students think. And if they like it, do more of it. If they don't like it, stick to written feedback. But I think it's nice to. I think the idea of audio feedback has been around for a long time, but what's changed is the way in which now the tools which offer that opportunity are just so simple and easy to use. I mean, you couldn't really get a simpler tool than, say, vocaroo. You've got a big red record button in the middle of the screen. You press record. There's no sign up involved. It generates a link. You can generate a QR code or share the link in the chat or whatever it might be. It's really, really simple. Likewise with Mote, it's a really simple technology which can be very, very effective because it's all about the power of the human voice, I think.
Yeah, and to be honest, again, I was listening to you and again, thoughts were running through my head, and I'm thinking, you know, this audio feedback that you give students, and in particular, obviously in education in general, but in particular in foreign language teaching, audio feedback is actually a listening activity, is it not? That's what it is, right? Yeah. And written feedback is never a reading activity. So this is the difference, right? When students listen to the feedback they got from their teachers, this becomes a listening activity. And as a matter of fact, the teacher could even use it as teaching materials in the next lesson. So, you know, students could somehow paraphrase or do something with this feedback. And this is how we help students internalize it and really understand the feedback. So I think
I agree. And also the teacher can offer a model of pronunciation as well. I think that can also really help with spoken feedback. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a win-win, really. I just think I'd love to see more teachers using it, really.
But again, I'm going to be cheeky. So, you know, it's all good, but then I still kind of feel that a combination of oral feedback and written feedback would work best. So you see, we wouldn't like teachers to suddenly discover oral feedback and just do away, you know, with written feedback, because I think that both are needed and both kind of serve a different purpose in a sense.
Yeah.
And also, what do you think about adult learners? Because you see, oral feedback will definitely work with my niece. But now imagine a professional, someone who is really serious, someone who wants to study English and there is a very clear purpose for their studies. Now, do you think these people will be happy with this kind of feedback, or do you think they would still prefer written feedback? I mean, I don't know how you and your experience and the workshops that you've already delivered and the millions of teachers that you've taught, you know, about feedback feel about it? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think again, I think that's a really interesting question. Sometimes I will ask people whether they think that such an activity will work with adults, and they'll say yes, they will. So, for example, even things like giving out stickers and things like that, you might think that's going to be something which is just for children, but or even 14 to 16-year-olds, you think, oh, that will never work with them, and actually, practicing teachers say, well, actually, they do. They really like them because maybe they feel that, when they're just focusing on exams, that actually to have a bit more fun and a bit more of a ludic, a playful approach to their learning is actually a bit of a novelty and can be really good. But I think, as with children, each group of adults is completely different. Therefore, if you fancy the idea of trying out verbal feedback, then maybe ask people first, see what they think, try it out. I'm sure there'll be some adults that will take to verbal feedback. There'll be other adults that want everything written and very sort of traditional, as it were. So I would ask the adults what they would like in the form of feedback, and then cater to their needs based on the approach that you do. That's what I would do, because everyone is different, and some adults might love that approach, and some adults absolutely wouldn't. Or you could have a mixture, couldn't you? Going back to what you were saying earlier, I agree that you wouldn't want to get rid of written feedback completely, but just have a mix of ideas. Maybe if it was for a more serious piece of work, maybe a project or an essay, maybe you'd prefer to have written feedback as opposed to spoken feedback, or the other way around. It depends on what you think is going to be most valuable for the students, really. Maybe on sort of small tasks, audio feedback might be better, but then if you want to say print off like QR codes and what have you, you won't want to be doing that in lots and lots of different short bits of work, because it will take too much time, unless it's one QR code with whole class feedback, and then you just copy and paste that, or print that off, copy and paste that, say 30 times, and print them off, cut them up, and put them in the exercise books that way. But I would imagine, because it would take a little bit longer, if that's what you wanted to do, if you wanted to put in QR codes into an exercise book, onto bits of paper, then maybe for longer bits of work, then you can justify the time that would take. On another point on that as well, there's a really fantastic Microsoft tool called Microsoft Lens, which it allows you to say scan a piece of paper. So a student could do a piece of work on a piece of paper in their exercise book. You can scan it with Microsoft Lens and then digitize it and turn it into a PDF, and then you could then upload that to wherever, Google Drive or what have you, and then use one of these screencasting tools like Screencastify, and then annotate over the top. So that would be a way you could digitize a paper form and make it into an electronic form. That would be another thing that you could do as well. So those are a few more answers or thoughts.
Yeah, I'm mindful of the time, and it's like 3 minutes left. So I have so many more questions, but I'm not going to get to ask you these questions today. But I just want to kind of say it again, that what we are saying now, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, okay? Because I don't want to be putting words in your mouth, but what we are saying is that it's not the matter of either, right? It's not the matter of this or that. It's the matter of either this or that. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's as with anything to do with teaching, it's choosing the approach that you think is going to be most effective. So I'm absolutely not saying get rid of written feedback completely, just have audio feedback, but in the right context, in the right moment, with the right piece of work, audio feedback, I think, can be as effective, if not more effective, for the reasons I've talked about.
Yeah, and I just have to say this. I've already said this, but I have to say it because I feel so strongly about it, and I'm going to use it myself tomorrow when I teach. I do feel that when this audio feedback could be used as teaching material by the teacher who provides the feedback. So it's all about kind of looping feedback as well. So you provide feedback, but then the language you use, because this, audio feedback, I mean, that's my feel about it. Audio feedback is light-hearted, and many people kind of think that written feedback carries more weight, and it's actually true in a sense. So when you provide oral feedback, you are still kind of matter of fact, and you still focus on what you want to say, but it's light-hearted, right? So that means that you can choose, when you provide feedback, you could choose the language that you've just covered with your students, so they have to identify this language. It's a listening activity, and you can look feedback beautifully. I don't know if I'm making much sense now.
Well,
but
I think to say that it's more light-hearted spoken feedback, I think that's a perception. It could be light-hearted, but it could also be as serious as written feedback. It depends on talking about conveying meaning, the tone of your voice. If you present the feedback in a sort of jovial way, as it were, then it might be perceived differently compared to if you sound more serious when you're giving the feedback. So I think that, again, once you'd established this routine of giving regular audio feedback, I think that it wouldn't be regarded necessarily as light-hearted at all. I think that any sort of feedback a teacher wants to give to the students, they want to make sure it's as effective as possible. And I think you get into that routine of actually it's as powerful, if not more powerful, than written feedback. It depends on the tone of the voice, the relationship that the teacher has with the students, and vice versa, about how how it's perceived, how it's received by the children. Definitely. Just on another point as well, just in relation to sort of peer feedback. If you wanted to encourage peer feedback, tools like Padlet that I talked about when I listed a whole range of different tools for feedback. I think Padlet and Seesaw are very good in the sense that you can have one question and then you can have all the students either giving written feedback, almost like a dialogue actually, when you can respond to each one, as opposed to a question and then everyone does one answer. So if you want to have it's also referred to as a back channel, so like Twitter can be like a back channel, or the chat in this Zoom call right now is a type of back channel whereby some people prefer to write their thoughts or their questions. That could be delivered in the same way using a tool like Padlet or Seesaw. So I think having peer feedback could be arguably even more powerful than teacher feedback, because maybe peers could be harder or more direct, let's say, with the feedback that they give to their friends or to their peers compared to what the teacher might say. So in my experience, having taught in the classroom for many years, I think that the feedback that a peer could give or another student could give could maybe even be more direct, let's say, but could be more not hard hitting, but could make more of an impact because it's a peer as opposed to the teacher giving that feedback, if that makes sense. So peer feedback is another idea, I think, which is can be facilitated through the use of technology.
It's just, I have so many questions about, alternatives to teacher feedback, and different tools. No time for this, Hedy. So it's back to you. Sorry, Joe, it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your feedback about this session to do with feedback. I think there are so many different ways in which we can look at feedback. This is just really, if you like, touching the surface of what you can do with feedback. But I certainly think that technology lends itself really nicely to real-time feedback as well as the power of spoken feedback. But the bottom line is it all goes back to one of the pillars of education of teaching and learning, which is the importance of giving feedback, be it written feedback or audio feedback, and making that feedback timely. So the technology facilitates the idea of feedback, but feedback, we've known the power of feedback for years and years and years, ever since the beginning of time in relation to teaching and learning. So why not try out some ideas from this workshop based on some suggestions that I've made. Give it a go, see what people think, see what the students think. If they like it, do more of it. If they don't like it, try something else. There's lots of ideas, but I would just give it a go. That would be my feedback to everyone listening, either live right now or asynchronously if you're watching the recording.
Yeah, Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
mean, yeah.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. And we haven't even mentioned what teachers can benefit from giving audio feedback, because then, then I need to collect my thoughts. I need to be clear and concise. And I think it's just amazing. Like, it helps us, thinking and, expressing ourselves.
I think bullet points, I would really encourage people to use bullet points. Certainly, as I mentioned, when I'm doing a podcast interview, I find that it works much more. It sounds much more natural. I think what the worst thing you can do is just read the feedback while you're recording your voice, or record a podcast when you're just reading the script. It's so obvious to the listener that that's what's happening. So if you have bullet points, it keeps it natural. It keeps it maybe bubbly, or what have you. It keeps it sounding authentic. And to me, that's the best way of getting good audio.